Hello, Decred community. Welcome to episode 45 of Decred In-Depth Live. I have with me today a man who needs no introduction in the Decred community. Jake Yocom-Piatt is the Decred project lead, very well known, and he comes today to discuss a very important topic with all of us. And so without further ado,
Hello, everybody. How you doing?
hello, Jake. Thank you for taking the time to come talk with all of us today.
For sure. Yeah, it's an exciting time for the Decred project with this proposal vote going live soon.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And there's just been so much enthusiasm and engagement and questions. And so, just for the audience, if you guys can go ahead and subscribe, comment, do all that engagement stuff that helps the algorithms out. And I'm going to jump right into these questions as not to waste time. Audience, if any questions come up throughout this conversation, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But for the most part, we're just going to power through these. I do want to apologize if any of this, sounds repetitive to you. I know that a lot of the questions just keep getting asked and asked again, but I think that doing things in an audio format can really help kind of dissect some of the idiosyncrasies of these discussions. And so I want to start by discussing those initial conversations with TacoTime about the subsidy split way back when. At that time, why did you see the 60-30-10 proof of work, proof of stake, treasury subsidy split as better than the 30-60-10?
That's a good question. So let's talk about time frame. We had these discussions between roughly, I want to say sometime like early 2015 and then early 2016. So there was some back and forth between me and TacoTime about what the subsidy split should be. I don't recall there being a whole lot of input on the topic from INGSOC, but I could obviously review my logs if I really wanted to drill down. But when it comes to conversations with TacoTime, the initial suggestion was from them was to do what is it, the 30% proof of work, 60% proof of stake, and then 10% treasury. And I pushed for the opposite, and the motivation was, in retrospect, this was naive, is to push for the opposite, that is 60-30 in favor of the miners, because mining takes a lot of it's expensive. Like, if you're going to mine, you have to have special infrastructure, you have to have special hardware, you have to have people who manage the facility. So there's a whole lot of stuff that has to happen when you're mining that doesn't happen when you're staking. Like, staking is, hey, I have a computer, it's on 24/7, 365. That's it. You don't need megawatts of power or someone who's making sure that a building doesn't burn down 24/7, 365.
Why do you say that was a naive thought in that time, in retrospect?
Well, I think that, and maybe this is reading too far into it, but my perception is now, after having seen the data that tacosrevenge showed me with respect to the actions of the miners and where all of the coins that are getting dumped on places like Binance are coming from, is after seeing that, it made it clear to me that proof of work is, hey, maybe I didn't think it was horribly decentralized in the first place, but to see that it was quite eye-opening and, kind of like a shock to the system, like, wow, it really is this centralized. And on top of that, we're dealing with a centralized actor that is not here to support the project. They're here to, do a combination of things: damage the project, make money, and cause us grief. So it's like seeing that and then thinking like, man, I do remember TacoTime pushed for this other, this subsidy split the other way back in the day. And to think about that historically is kind of like a wince moment for me. I'm like, oh man, maybe they really did know that this was coming, in the sense that they saw that proof of work was more rigged than I perceived it initially back in the day.
You kind of answered my next question a little bit, but I do want to ask it just very specifically. When you first read TacoRevenge's work, what was your immediate thoughts?
Well, I had the luxury of liaising a bit with TacoRevenge in, over DMs in the run up to both of these posts. And so I had a little bit of foreknowledge on these topics. the reaction I had was, I my observations had been that yes, there is someone who is acting at least nominally maliciously in the markets, but it wasn't clear to me exactly to what extent, or what that meant exactly. Like, hey, it's malicious, but how malicious? How are they acting? How much? How many coins do they have? I had no idea about any of this. So when I saw these articles and I saw numbers put to it, and I saw some of the more detailed analysis that had been shared with me directly, that really was very eye-opening. That is, I had always sensed that, hey, there's something that isn't right with Decred markets. Like let me give you an example. We have a release every, I don't know, roughly 12 months or 6 months, depending on what we're releasing. And during these releases, you would normally expect the release occurs, and then maybe there's a pump in the run up to the release, and then maybe there's a sell off after the release. This classic thing where it's like you buy the rumor and you sell the news. That might be something that I think would be normal and organic. But what we ended up seeing, release after release, is that we would be talking about the release. We would start hyping the release, and then before anything happened, the price would start going down, and it was like, what is going on? Like the price just keeps going down, and it's like, we're about to release new code with new features that people actually want, and the price is dumping. What the hell is this? And so that combined with reading the tacosrevenge articles, I'd always sensed that there was something amiss. But to see numbers put to it, and someone put the time in to do the analysis, and that process really sort of opened my eyes to the extent of the problem. I always knew that there was a problem, but I wasn't exactly sure what the source of the problem was or what the scale of the problem was.
In reading through these conversations on politeia, one thing I kind of started thinking is that in some way the release of the DEX kind of help reveal some of these market shenanigans. Do you think that's true, or am I off base there? Or in what ways do you think the DEX helped sort of reveal the suppressor group's behaviors?
Well, I think that without the DEX, we would have had, and the corresponding bidding on the DEX, there wouldn't have been an opportunity to really see how all of this worked. That is, the steady flow of coins coming off of centralized exchanges, Binance almost exclusively, and to some extent Bittrex, but almost exclusively off of Binance and then going to the DEX. That process effectively exposed the suppressor, in the sense that if this was going on at a small scale for a very long time, there's a lot more plausible deniability involved with the flows of coins that are required to sustain activity like this. So if you're going to sustain a price and drive a price down, it requires a steady flow of coins. And those coins have to come from somewhere. So that process, only once you start really pulling coins off of an exchange and draining that exchange, can you see where all the coins are coming from very clearly. Like otherwise, it's like, hey, look, in a steady state, it looks just like it normally does. Let me give you an example. If someone were to buy, I don't know, a couple 100,000 Decred, off of Binance before all this started, hey, maybe they would have seen some deposits and some flows, but it took literally the scale of millions of Decred in order for these patterns to show up and for tacosrevenge to nose them out. So that is, that's something that I think really, the DEX can't be overlooked. That is, without the DEX and the bidding on the DEX, we wouldn't have seen these flows of coins into Binance and been able to go, aha, this is what's going on.
So your proposal is proposing a change in the subsidy, and what you have proposed is 10% to proof of work, 80% to proof of stake, and 10% to the treasury. Some have called this drastic, but why is this change necessary to course correct, and do you see this as drastic?
I do agree that it's drastic. I think it's fair to characterize it as a drastic change. It's a legitimate pivot. And, I say this as somebody who's made several pivots career-wise and otherwise, and even within the Decred project over the past several years. I've made several pivots, and, I'm a person who undergoes drastic change myself every so often. So it's like, hey, if I really want to, if somebody pokes me or really, gets me irritated, oh, I'll switch gears and I'll figure out how to flatten them and wreck their shit. And that's how I roll. So what I saw here was basically this is someone taking a stick to the project and beating the shit out of the project and trying to wreck it. And correspondingly, what's the only way to really deal with this? The only way to deal with, somebody who's a bully or who's a destructive person, as much as any of us want to be like, be the better person, just outclass them. No, the reality is you have to pick up your own stick and hit somebody in the face with it. And that's really what I view this proposal as. And it is very drastic. And I mean, the idea here is that after seeing the mechanics of how the suppressor works and how the suppressor, their crew operates, is drastic change is required to change what is clearly a very drastic problem. The scale of this problem is huge. That is that something like 80+% of the mined coins, presumably for the past 3 or more years, have been used as a cudgel to beat the project into the ground, despite us delivering, one technical innovation and improvement after another. So it's like, that's my sense of this, which is that I know it's drastic. I think it's legitimate to characterize it as drastic, but only drastic action can be used to balance the drastic attack that's been, ongoing against the project, presumably for at least 3 years.
You talked about sort of the mechanics of how this, the suppressor group, we're just going to continue to refer to them as TS. Some people in the community think that this is overblown, overstated. And obviously I've read through TacoRevenge's work, and as have you, and we're both, very convinced by the analysis. For those like myself who are a little bit smaller brained, jokingly I say, can you maybe kind of walk through what that mechanic process is, just so the audience gets an understanding of how this is working? And then I want to talk about ASIC mining in general and kind of how this came to be.
Sure thing. So the way that here's the very high level picture of what's going on is the following. Someone, presumably somebody who didn't like the project, and I would say didn't like the project or, really wanted to take the project out. And I would say all of this started sometime back in 2017. I say this in 2017 because it takes time to develop ASICs. You have to develop them. You have to go to, even if you're Bitmain or whoever, you have to go to your manufacturer. You have to give them, design circuits, have them made, have them tested, have them, have them, do burn-ins, make sure the thing doesn't melt. There's all kinds of steps that have to occur in order for you to develop an ASIC. These ASICs came online in early 2018, meaning sometime during 2017, someone or some group was like, yo, we don't like Decred, let's wreck this shit. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to mine a whole bunch of coins, and then we're going to dump them and drive the price down. So mechanically, how does this work? They mine the coins get mined at a mining pool. Then from the mining pool, they go into payouts. Payouts are fan-out payments that go from mining pools. So in some cases, there are large payments that go to large individual miners, but then there's a whole bunch of smaller payments. So all of these payments, most of them go to exchanges directly. So that they go to Bittrex, they go to Poloniex, they go to OKX, they go to Wobi, they go to Binance. So they take these coins and then they spread them out across a whole bunch of exchanges. And then what they'll do is then they move them from those exchanges to wherever the bidding is going on. And they do it in a way that's distributed so you can't see it really, right? If you're just sort of casually inspecting the blockchain, you're not going to see this kind of stuff. But then if you look across all the exchanges and then you start to watch how things are moving, it becomes clear that what's happening here is that they use the exchanges like mixers, so that they act like mixers so that, hey, let's say I point out that this is going on. They can wave it off and go, no, Jake's crazy. No, that's not happening. These are just people transferring coins between exchanges. But then you look at things like Wobi. Wobi's an exchange with almost no activity on it in terms of trading activity and fills and volume. But somehow it's moved, probably 700,000 Decred at this point to Binance. And so what's happening there? Clearly, no one's buying the Decred. It's clearly just being withdrawn. So the miners deposit it, they withdraw it, then they move it to where it needs to be, and then they attack with it. And so mechanically, that's how this is being done. And this is presumably being done by people who are very familiar with the mining industry, because they can do it much cheaper and much quicker and with much less difficulty than, say, you or I could. So if we tried to get into the ASIC game, it's going to be very hard. There's going to be a big learning curve, and then hey, after maybe a year or two, we'll get good.
Yes, I thank you for that explanation. It seems the scale of what's being suggested is very massive, and it seems that someone was willing to put in a lot of capital up front, was also willing to be very patient, someone who is very sophisticated. Offline, you and I have discussed, some of the strange things that have gone on in terms of social media. As a kind of this voice for the community, I can attest to, just the random accounts, rude questions to guests. And these are always these very sketchy accounts too. It's always the same groups of people. As someone who, puts things on YouTube, I have familiar with search engine optimization, and I've always just been so baffled at how we can get views and the watch time is, pretty decent. And engagement now has been up too. And still it seems like the organic traffic to Google has always just been. So what I'm suggesting is it seems that there's something very big scale. And so this drastic measure that we're suggesting as like kind of a whacking stick seems very appropriate. But what could be motivating these people or this group? And maybe, is it a group? Is it a person? Like in your imagination, I know obviously you just have to be guessing, but what are your thoughts about, sort of the scale at which this thing seems to have been, executed?
Well, let's just review sort of the facets of how this is being done. First, someone has miners. They have a lot of miners, and they've got the infrastructure and the people to mine and to do it efficiently and to do it, with cheap electricity and with cheap manufacturing costs. They also have their fingers in probably every single exchange, every single centralized exchange. In fact, I'm to understand that they operate directly on the DEX as well. So they have miners, all the infrastructure, and all of the back end to create these miners and the money. Then they have the infrastructure to trade on every exchange. They have bots on probably every exchange. And then they also have, in addition to this, there's clearly a social media component. There's a troll or sort of attack the project on social media component to all of this, and that's probably been going on for several years as well. So the scale of this, the attacks that the project has been under are significant, and whoever's doing this is quite sophisticated. I mean, something that you'll see is if you go and you look at the bid and the ask on Binance, it looks like garbage. It looks super thin. So someone who naively just walks up and goes, "Oh, hey, I wonder what's going on here on Binance," what they'll see a really thin ask and a really thin bid, and they'll think, "I can't buy size, I can't sell size. There's no liquidity." And the reality is that you can buy pretty much as much Decred as you could ever possibly imagine on Binance. And the price doesn't even really move. So whoever is doing this is very, very sophisticated in the sense that and I mean, I even get the impression that we are not the only project that's being targeted by this operation. That is, that this operation presumably targets a wide number of projects, because the infrastructure I'm talking about is pretty broad. I mean, this is probably easily a team of, I would estimate, no less than 10 people, probably more like 20 people. And then you go, okay, well, 20 people, I mean, shit, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of work. Decred could just be one of a dozen victims of an operation like this being run against particular projects that whoever this group identifies as a threat.
I want to stick very momentarily on ASIC miners and ASIC miner monopolies, just to get an understanding, diving through these conversations on politeia. How do these monopolies occur? And, this idea of competing with manufacturers being prohibitively high, do you think changing the subsidy will alter this competitive landscape?
Let's see. So let's talk about ASIC miners. So the way ASIC miner monopolies work is really what it comes down to is economies of scale and sort of the experience. Any industry that you're in requires experience. I'm in software. It takes several years to get good enough at it to be like, wow, I'm an expert and I can actually deliver stuff that works and I can complete programming projects and have them work right. The same thing applies for every industry. So ASIC mining is no different. Before you can really, be a qualified ASIC miner, you need to get a couple projects off the ground. You need to knock out a couple pieces of hardware that perform and deliver and people can make money off of. So whoever does that first has a huge edge. So for example, if I'm a Bitcoin miner and I make a Bitcoin ASIC like Bitmain, I have the manufacturers, I have the engineers, I have the infrastructure to run the hardware, I have connections presumably in the Chinese government that allow me to get the cheapest power anywhere in China. So things like that are what lead to what I perceive now as effectively an ASIC monopoly. That is, I think maybe an oligopoly might be a fairer way to say it, but in the context of Decred, it most certainly is a monopoly. That is that, as far as I can tell, or as far as I'm aware, the monopoly is primarily, I think it might be safer to call it an oligopoly because there's a couple players. There's the WhatsMiner D1s, and then there's the Antminer DR5s. And so those two pieces of hardware are pretty much it. And if you don't have one of those, you're going to have a very hard time mining. And then if you try to compete with these people, you're competing with organizations that operate at the scale of billions of dollars and have been working with the manufacturers they've been working with for years. So you try to show up and make your own ASIC. You might go to the same fabrication place that they do, and then they know about what you're doing before you've even announced it. So even if you tried to launch a stealth ASIC, there's a very real chance that your project and your privacy leaks to these people who have insider connections with the fabrication facilities themselves. So it really does turn into what is effectively a monopoly, especially for Decred. And I think that it's effectively a monopoly for Bitcoin too, as much as people want to talk about proof of work being decentralized, because look, there's a bunch of mining pools, and it's like, well, what if all the miners are owned by the same freaking people? Then there's not much decentralization, is there? The mining pools act as cutouts so that people think like, oh, this mining pool only has this much hash power. And it's like, you could have one miner and they spread all their hash rate across 4 pools, 5 pools, 6 pools. Doesn't matter. It's centralized. And then what was the second part of the question that you asked?
It was about the prohibitively high cost of manufacturing, and do you think changing the subsidy will somehow alter that landscape for manufacturers?
Well, I think what in terms of altering it for manufacturers, it's going to be cheaper and easier for these established players to do this, irrespective. It's going to be very difficult to break that part. You can't really get away from that. That process is just that process. And as much as, hey, I would love to break away from it and really get us more open water, it's challenging to do that from a perspective of cost and from a development side, which is that if you want to change, say, the proof of work algorithm or change, cut over to pure proof of stake, that's a huge development ask. So what as much as I acknowledge, yes, there's a problem with the monopoly on proof of work on Decred, there's not much we can do to change that quickly. So we can get there via other means over time. But that's the other that's the other way to view this subsidy change, is that it's basically a relatively quick change that we can put in place to dial down the volume on the fire hose that is pointed at the project.
I want to momentarily pontificate about the relationship between manufacturers of ASICs and this suppressor group, because it seems that, to me, and correct me just any errors that I have in this thinking, this group would have to have a large amount of miners currently. And so they either developed those miners themselves, or at least were able to get access to these miners, in large quantities beforehand or before everyone else. There was discussions about ASIC prices being artificially high. And I guess what I'm trying to discover is it seems as though the manufacturing industry, it would have to be someone within there that would at least be helping this group, and like you said, maybe attacking multiple projects. And so what do you think about, am I thinking in the right way, or am I off? What are your thoughts?
I think it's pretty. What you're suggesting is pretty likely. That is, this TS is either super close to these people who are the manufacturers, or they are the manufacturers themselves. The scale at which this stuff is going on is large. Now, in terms of miners and their costs, I mean, my understanding is that when you're one of these insiders and you manufacture in bulk, I don't know, say 3,000 or 4,000 What's Miner D1s, that might cost you $10 million. But then you go, okay, well, what's the per unit cost? We're talking $3,000 to $4,000, and then you go, what are people selling these for used? I mean, they're selling them used for $10,000. So there's definitely games being played here. That is, that whoever TS is has insider connections in the mining industry on top of all these other pieces of infrastructure that we've touched on earlier. So I think that saying that it is the manufacturers might be a bit too aggressive, but their level of involvement is very high at a minimum.
I want to walk through like sort of I'm surely you're familiar with like I think it's Murray Rothbard and like human action and this idea of Austrian economics and people kind of like making their own decisions and within a free market, right? And to their own rational ends, right? And if I'm trying to think about how I want to ask this question, if right now ASIC miners are producing at a 900% return, it seems that anyone who has access to cheap electricity would be incentivized to acquire these miners and use that energy, and even not even cheap electricity at 900% profit. And so when we finally decide to cut the subsidy, if that happens, suddenly the reward for mining goes down drastically. And if we think about what then becomes the consequence of that, it seems that for some people, maybe it becomes, those miners become sort of like not as worthwhile for their electricity. Maybe for some people, it actually becomes more worthwhile. But I guess what I'm asking you is, how do you see sort of the mechanics of, the hash rate of Decred kind of playing out if this subsidy thing were to be cut? Sort of, how do you think the human response would be, if that makes sense?
Well, I think there's a whole lot of things that could happen. It's very difficult to predict what happens when it comes to markets. I mean, what this is going to do is this is going to drastically increase the cost of mining Decred. So right now it's very cheap to mine Decred if you have the right equipment. So for a very low price, you can mine Decred, get it super cheap, and then use it like a stick and try to hit, the Decred price in the face. That's an effective tactic because the stick you're hitting someone with is cheap. What will happen here is that stick is going to become a lot more expensive, and that is going to change the dynamics of the market. That is that, assuming this does pass, then what will end up happening is that it will be much more expensive to attack Decred in the way that we're discussing right here. And and my hope is that it dissuades TS from continually attacking and basically constricts their supply of coins that they use to attack the project with. So that's my hope in terms of what goes on. And then this also touches on another topic, which is what is the point of a consensus algorithm? A consensus algorithm pays someone in the native asset to perform something that creates something beneficial for the project. In this case, security. What's clear is that the miners aren't generating security. The miners are just grinding. They're taking advantage of being overpaid and then using that to attack the project. And it ends up that this supposedly democratized and distributing mechanism for distributing coins is actually a very negative thing, and it doesn't distribute the coins fairly. It distributes them all to like one entity who then uses them to attack the project. So proof of stake is actually substantially fairer from that perspective when it comes to like, okay, well, you've got coins locked up. If you just keep dumping coins, you're going to get less and less coins over time. As a relative fraction of stake, someone else will get them and stake them up, and then they'll get the subsidy. So this whole process is, in terms of predicting what's going to happen, I think it could support a bull run on the price. But hey, maybe it doesn't. I mean, to me, the first and foremost thing, to be honest, I really don't care about the way the market responds, because what it comes down to is the project will die if people keep doing this. This is basically a project killing attack, and it's been going on for years. So in my view, the only way to really, deal with this is to try to push back hard and hope for the best.
Do you see this as a Band-Aid solution? And do you think in the future we may want to pay miners more if, we see sort of more honest miners step in?
I think that, yes, it is a Band-Aid solution in the sense that there are more ideal solutions out there, like one of them being, hey, let's just ditch proof of work entirely. I mean, but then again, maybe proof of work is fair, but done differently. And I think that what we're seeing now is that under the current way that proof of work works for Decred, it's incredibly unfair. I would argue that, it's almost certainly the same way for almost every other cryptocurrency out there. It's unfair. Even cryptos like Monero that are supposedly ASIC resistant, in the sense that, okay, maybe you make it so everybody has the same commodity hardware, but now what's going to happen is people are just going to play energy arbitrage and go like, oh, where can I get the cheapest electricity? And whoever's mining in that location is going to dominate the the proof of work process for someone who's ASIC resistant. So I think that whether proof of work ends up being something that can be made fair is something that requires substantial changes beyond just simply changing the proof of work algorithm, because of all of the problems. There's two real problems with proof of work. One is the economy of scale with the fabrication process to fabricate the hardware. And then the other one is the electricity side, which is that it just turns into electricity arbitrage. Who's got the cheapest power? And then whoever can, cozy up to that, that nation state is in the best position to mine coins. So there's a lot that needs to change to fix proof of work, in my opinion, because right now it's incredibly unfair. And maybe at some point in the future that will happen, and maybe it will make more sense to be like, hey, let's go back to proof of work now that we can, have some assurances that it's fairer.
Yes, because the way I had been conceptualizing it is I see the proof of work miners as like contractors for the stakeholders, and essentially we're just kind of reducing their pay, and as soon as their service becomes more valuable to us, if so in the future we need to kind of increase their pay, we can revisit at that time. I do want to ask you sort of about the timing of this change in subsidy split in regards to where we are in the emissions schedule. I'm sure you've looked at the conversations on politeia, and essentially, I think my question is do you see this as being sort of like almost an ideal time for us to make such a change, given that we already are at, more than 60% of the total emissions being mined?
I think it works out pretty well in that regard, because I have seen some of the numbers that people have been, churning out on the proposal comments. But my take on it is more one of, let's view Decred as effectively a digital nation state. Someone is attacking us. We can't sustain this attack forever, and if they keep it up and we don't do anything, our nation state is gonna take it on the nose, and it's gonna go into the toilet. And so, this idea of the emission schedule and, is it fair? That really is completely secondary to me. I view this more from sort of a military engagement standpoint, in that someone's attacking us, they're destroying our base, and if they keep attacking, we're not going to have a base to speak of. This thing's going to be total junk. So this idea of the perfect time, hey, maybe it is. We gave everyone a chance to get cheap coins, and say the way that we marketed Decred wasn't sufficient to outdo the activity from the suppressor. So hey, we made a best effort. We let coins be out there. They were cheaply available. You could get coins for like $10 for quite a while, or $20. And if that time has passed, I don't really see a problem with it. We gave people ample opportunity to show up and pick up coins on the cheap, and people weren't biting because the unfortunate reality is that many people, and I'm not one of them, consider price to be a proxy for relevance. So if the market cap of your project or the price of your coins isn't high enough, it's not interesting. So it's like price, bidding begets bidding. And, we've had an opportunity to go through this phase and be like, hey, it's cheap. Anybody can get it for cheap. And, hey, if that never happens again, I wouldn't see it as a problem.
I agree. What do you think about conversations of taking some of the subsidy from proof of work and moving it over to the treasury?
My observation with the treasury is that even at 10%, the treasury, we do not drain the treasury the same way other projects do. Other projects that have treasuries are almost exclusively, venture capital seeded, or they're a token, so that they have big VC investors. And then what's their approach is to spend and just bill and be like, oh, if we throw tens of millions of dollars at a problem, or hundreds or billions of dollars at a problem, we can solve it. And what we've seen with Decred is that it doesn't take that. It takes ideological driven people, and even a small number of them, to really make a change when it comes to technology in the context of blockchain. And that's the same sort of thing that it took to create Bitcoin in the first place. A small group of ideologically driven people who work together to build something that, is going to, change the world for the better. And that process is not something, you don't need billions of dollars for that. But when it comes to the treasury, our burn rate is super low. So like lately, our burn rate is under 1,000 coins a month. So that's only a fraction of that 10%. So as a function of that, I don't think that it's really, as much as, we could direct it towards the treasury, I would argue that the treasury has plenty of money in it for the foreseeable future. So pointing more money into that strikes me as not a great idea, in the sense it's like we're already paying the treasury enough. But, from a perspective of, say, attracting new investors, the yield from staking is much higher once this happens. So I think that it's better to have that go to stakers than it is to go to the treasury. The treasury has plenty of money. We're not burning through it at anywhere near the speed it's coming in right now. So why pile it higher there?
How do you respond to criticisms that this is an unfair treatment to honest miners? And to this end, have you talked with any honest miners?
I'm skeptical that honest miners exist beyond maybe people who are running one or two ASICs. That is, that honest miners exist on a scale of maybe 10%, maybe 5% of the hash rate, maybe 1%. I mean, my perception of the data that I've seen about the mining and the mining pools and how TS operates, they easily have 80% of the hash rate. They might have 90 or 95% of the hash rate. So as much as, yes, there are honest miners, and I'm sure they exist, okay, what percentage of the hash rate are you guys? And here's the other thing. ASICs, especially in the context of Decred, are a risky investment. We might change the consensus rules. We could change the proof of work algorithm. These are real risks that you have to think about upfront when you're buying miners. And I mean, here's another conjecture of mine, which is that the attempts to sell used miners over the past several months or year are actually part of an effort on part of TS to get smaller fish involved in mining, know that they won't be nearly as profitable because they got sold a piece of equipment that cost $3,000 for $10,000 after it had been run for, who knows how long, a year, 2, 3 years. So it's EOL-ish equipment getting sold for way too much money to people who don't know, what they're doing. And so as much as I don't, I get it. There are people who are super upset, but it's like, okay, you invested, I don't know, 15, 20, $30,000 in something, and then you're upset because, hey, it's going to be less profitable. You don't know that it's going to be less profitable. The price could go up. Maybe it'll be just as profitable. So this idea that, hey, I threw a few tens of thousands of dollars at something and now I'm upset because the terms of the mining are changing, go mine another currency. Decred is something that can change over time, and if you expect it to never change because you spent $20,000, you're living in a fantasy land, and Decred isn't for you, because the rules can and will change according to what we as sort of a digital nation state need. I'm not out to screw anybody, and I don't think anybody else here in the project really is, unless you're TS, of course. And so, I'm not trying to screw anybody, but this is a sink or swim moment for the project. If the project doesn't change something, it's just going to get hammered into quote unquote irrelevance. That is, that the price will drop, and then it's like, oh, to the average person, the project isn't relevant because it's only worth like $1 a Decred, and this dog coin is worth $1 billion a coin or whatever. It's that doesn't matter to me, but I know it matters to everybody else. So, as a function of that, I have to sort of, balance what I think is relevant for the project as a whole and not. And if you're a small fish miner, or you're the 1% of the hash rate that's honest, I'm sorry, but we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater here.
Is it possible that the suppressor group is also a staker? And do you have any concerns about them maybe switching their strategies?
Oh, they're definitely a staker. 42% is 42% of all of the staked coins that have been deposited at Binance. According to the second tacosrevenge article, and I've actually seen the granular data on this. 42% of that is directly linked to miners. That is, that the people who deposited those staked coins were miners, and they were miners of some scale. And so that's what we can see as linked to the miners. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 80% of it is linked to the miners in terms of the staked coins that were deposited on Binance. So they've definitely been staking. One thing that I can't help but notice is, have you noticed that the participation rate on proposals has gone up by like tens of percent? That is a function of coins going from TS to people who actually vote them on proposals. So they've been staking for quite a while. In fact, as far as I can tell, from the beginning. So that what they do is that there's a certain number of coins that they keep on exchanges, and then the rest of it that's otherwise idle that they won't need, that boom, it goes into stake, so they can make more coins, so they can suppress more.
And while meanwhile mining and then waiting for critical moments to engage in the market behavior that they need to do.
Yep. Oh, there's a release. Time to dump. Time to drive the price down. Oh, the release is, we're going to drive the price down before a release. Oh, we're going to drive the price down after a release. Oh, we're going to drive the price down as soon as there's any positive news. Oh, someone was bidding? Let's drive the price down now.
Do you have concerns that we might not be acting drastically enough?
This is about as drastically as I think we can act for right now. Turning the proof of work subsidy down to 10%, it should make miners much closer to break even. The goal isn't to basically bankrupt miners. It's to go, listen, you can't just mine coins and throw them at us for nothing. You actually have to pay for most of that now. So we're dialing up the costs so that the attacks aren't as trivially done and are more expensive. I mean, about the only thing further we can do that's quick is to go to 1% or something, but then that really screws miners. So I'm not really out to completely screw the miners, but I'm out to basically shut off the fire hose.
I want to get into what I consider to be some of the more difficult questions that I had seen throughout the conversations. Do you worry about staker centralization and any concerns about plutocracy, especially given the high barrier of entrance for tickets?
I think that this plutocracy position on proof of stake is a is an outgrowth of Vitalik's position that he laid out years ago for staking in the context of Ethereum. That is that he's a project oracle. He doesn't like staking because it gives people who aren't him concrete power over the project. Like, whether it's VC or, people who are just early investors in Ethereum, it would give them too much power for his taste. So he deployed the narrative that proof of stake is plutocracy as a sort of an advanced countermeasure. So I think that said, sure, you can claim that it's plutocracy, but what it comes down to is it's way better than proof of work in the sense that it does a much better job of distributing the coins up front. That is that there's this argument that say proof of work is better because you get the coins and then miners are forced to sell them. There's nothing forcing miners to sell them. I've seen that. And when it comes to them selling it, they can sell it. They can be nice and sell it in a nice way, or they can sell it in a way that they're trying to chop your head off with it. So proof of work as being some sort of egalitarian, fair way to distribute coins is, in my opinion, a complete garbage. It's super centralized. And then what has been done is there's this, proof of stake is centralized. I think that the thing you have to think about too is the context of proof of stake. A lot of proof of stake is associated with heavily pre-mined projects. That is, projects that what we did is we did as small a pre-mine as we reasonably could so that those of us who did bring up don't get screwed, and then the people who participate in the airdrop don't get screwed. So we tried to balance it, make it as small as possible. A lot of projects like Ethereum, it's 70% pre-mined. So when you talk about who doesn't want proof of stake to happen, it really comes back to, in almost every case, projects that have a very centralized distribution schedule themselves. So it's like they can sit and talk about how proof of work is all egalitarian and fair, but the reality is, look at how it works. This is 70% pre-mine. That's a scam. That's like classic VC crap, where it's like, I'm gonna found a company and then I'm gonna sell like 5% of the shares at some comically high price to all my insider friends, and then look, the company's valued at $10 billion, and that's the way the game is played. So we didn't play that game. And then, I feel like this plutocracy narrative, if you look at it, there's a whole bunch of people out there who own just a few tickets. And there's way more of them than there are proof of work miners who own, a percent of the hash rate. So as much as anybody wants to talk about plutocracy, the reality is that proof of stake, provided you're not in the context of a very heavily pre-mined coin, is way more fair and way more egalitarian than proof of work. So what I find funny is no one's here talking about like, you should do fractional ownership of miners. I don't see anything about that. But on the other hand, there's an endless stream of people who I consider every single one of them to be a provocateur, claiming that, we need to stop working on other things and we need to focus on ticket splitting. At some point, yes, these things matter and we're going to, make this stuff work right. But we can't be expected to go, listen, we're going to take our scarce dev time, stop working on other things that are more relevant, and work on ticket splitting when nobody uses it. We had it working years ago, nobody used it. Maybe 100 tickets out of 40,000 used it. That was the most it ever got used.
One of the criticisms I read is that stakeholders voting to give themselves 80% of the reward goes against the ethos of a fair system. Do you worry that once we increase the rewards to stakers, it may become impossible to get 75% of stakeholders to agree to decrease that percentage in the future?
That is indeed a risk. That's a possibility that, hey, maybe it's a one-way valve. Maybe the staking subsidy will never get dialed down as a percentage after this. I think that that's a concern, but I think that this idea, all of these arguments about proof of stake are all basically fear, uncertainty, and doubt driven. So it's like, isn't it centralized? And it's like, well, sure, if up front, 70% of all the Decred in existence are owned by a single entity that paid $1 for it, when the project launched, okay, that's a problem. But when it comes to what it comes down to is that isn't how Decred works. And then, from this perspective of voting is that, people are going to vote, people are going to vote for things that they are incentivized to vote for. So to some extent, you could argue, yes, stakeholders are incentivized to vote themselves more money. But at the same time, what are our options here? Our options are design a completely new consensus system that doesn't use proof of work, doesn't use proof of stake, and isn't centralized from scratch, that's pretty much that's out the window. That'd take 2 years or 3 years. And then you go, okay, well, what about proof of work? Proof of work's super centralized. And then I think proof of stake is really our best option. So as much as people want to rag on it, you're like, oh well, it'll never go back. It's like maybe it shouldn't.
What would be the consequences if the suppressor group switched to becoming a staker as their new strategy?
They've already been doing that. It really would change nothing. They've been staking this for at least since ASICs showed up, probably from before that. So it really wouldn't change anything. It would just mean that maybe they mine a little bit less, maybe they stake a little bit more. But here's the upside. The upside is that with mining is when you mine, your ability to generate coins with your miners doesn't drop as a function of you selling those coins. You can dump those coins all day, and they've been doing that. So they can dump as many coins as they want, and it doesn't affect anything about how many coins they get on the supply side. On the other hand, when it comes to staking, once you start selling the coins that that you're staking, guess what? The rate at which you're getting coins drops. So it's a much better, and I think this has to do with incentive alignment. With proof of work, incentives are weakly aligned. That is that, hey, people will say, oh, the incentives are super aligned between proof of work miners and the network. And it's like, nah, not really, because you can do just what I described. You can mine it and then dump it. And the consequences to you are pretty much zero. If you had 10% of the hash rate before, you still got 10% of the hash rate, and you're still going to get those coins, and you can still dump them. Nothing's going to happen. On the other hand, if let's say it's pure proof of stake, just for sake of simplicity, you've got 10% of the subsidy coming to you. Okay, let's say you start dumping that. Well, guess what? Your fraction of the subsidy you get from staking is going to start dropping. And then you keep doing that, and it'll keep dropping. And eventually, you won't have any subsidy. So if you're going to dump as a tactic to attack, proof of stake is very bad for that.
I don't agree with this statement at all, but I want you to answer. Does changing the monetary policy dismantle any sound money case?
I think that people who focus on things like monetary policy have their head in sort of classical economics. Monetary policy is something that matters for fiat nations, for nation states that have fiat currencies that are managed by central banks. Central banks are central planning committees, and if you ask the point, what is the primary use case for money in a fiat system is as a medium of exchange. Monetary policy matters most for in that context. So this idea that you can go, oh, what about this is bad monetary policy. I mean, what would be good monetary policy? Letting someone crush the project into irrelevance? I mean, so this idea of going like your money and your state are separate. In the case of Decred, the money is the state. So this idea that you're going to be like, I can have this fixed, and I mean, let's be real, is a fixed, unchanging monetary policy really a policy? I mean, that's just like, that's like taking it as gospel. It's like, it's the Bible, right? To be like, oh, the Bible is the Bible, so that's our policy. Our policy is whatever's in the book. And it's like, that's not a policy. That's some crap somebody wrote down a long time ago. You're not changing anything. And so this idea that policy or monetary policy matters here is, I think it's really irrelevant because of Decred's sort of, the nature of Decred. Decred is not a central bank. It's not a central bank with a fiat currency. It's not a nation state, but it's effectively a network state that's run by its currency. So if people are attacking the project by attacking its markets, you can complain about monetary policy all day. What would you prefer for your nation state? For it to be a blasted wreck because somebody blew it up, or would you prefer for it to be a thriving place where people can succeed and store value in a way such that they don't lose money day after day while someone hammers the price to zero?
I could not agree anymore. I want to just take a moment because we are getting close to our time together. I have a few more questions that I want to ask, probably about two more. And they're definitely of a kind of a different sentiment than what we've been discussing. I want to say thank you for your time. I believe that the stakeholders are going to be very pleased with this interview and being able to listen to your thoughts. To everyone who asked questions in the chat and on Twitter and on Politeia that we were not able to get to, there's just time restraints, but I think that I've done the best to get to the ones that are most relevant. And Jake has answered some of them, even if they have not been asked directly, just in his talking. There's been this kind of, well, on Politeia, there was this distinction that was made between, the demand side and marketing and the supply side, the sell pressure. And there's been a lot of conversation about, sort of this why question and getting our name out there. Given everything you've just said in your last statement, I would love if you can just re-emphasize to the community the why for those people who have lost, sort of sight in all of this. What was the why for you, and what is that why today still for Decred as you see it?
The why for Decred is what it comes down to for me, and this is a very big picture thing. It's a good question. I'll try to keep it brief. Is why do I pursue this? Why do I do this with Decred? It's because the institutions that surround us in human society are frail, fragile, and in many cases completely broken, or so close to broken that they're effectively broken for most of us. I do this because, for example, I consider nation states as mostly a failure. Central banks, a complete failure, and they'll do anything to prop that crap up. And I think that's what's, Vax Passport, that's almost certainly because central banks want to stay in control. And how are they going to stay in control? Through things like a movement license that controls your position. Central banks are coming unglued at the seams. We need something to replace them, and we need it to be fair. We need it not to be run by just a central planning committee of people who have no skin in the game, a bunch of hired bureaucrats who can be blackmailed by whoever, whether it's because they have a sketchy trading record and then someone leaks it publicly, or similar. We need a system that is effectively free of external influences and has strongly aligned incentives. So for us to make progress as a human species, I think we need this infrastructure, and that's why I'm working on it. Is because without this, we're just it's just another day of proof of proximity to spigot, which is how the fiat banking system works. How close are you to the credit spigot? If you're super close, then you can do whatever you want. If you're towards the bottom, you constantly get screwed because people are inflating your money, the value of your money away. So this configuration of humanity, in my opinion, is unsustainable. Why do people fight? Because of these exact things that I'm talking about. Because the lower classes get robbed by inflation, and the upper classes get the credit issuance redirected back to them. So it's like it's a slow motion robbery for everybody who's lower income, and then everybody who's on top is like, I can borrow as much money as I want. And so, is that fair? No, that's a total scam. So that's why I Decred. That's why I do this, because I think nation states and central banks are anachronistic and inefficient and violent, and it's just another central planning committee. There's no hope of change. Whereas with something like Decred, if we can give people a better store of value, we can build out almost everything else. So that's sort of the it's the digital state. That's why I'm here.
Thank you for that. That needed to be said. My last question, and then I'm going to hand you over the mic just to end. And again, thank you, everyone. If you're still listening, tuning in, like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. The future, everyone, myself, I'm speaking for myself, but I am also speaking for the community. So many people look to you as an intellectual thinker, like a pioneer in this space, someone who's had vision, who's been here, since before Decred. My question to you is, now that we have cryptocurrencies, where is the future headed in terms of decentralized organizations?
I think that decentralized organizations have a lot further to go. I think that it would be effectively a Decred-like entity that has a lot of the infrastructure we have. That is that we have, we have a treasury and it's new, and I swear the next payout for contractors will come out of that treasury. So what it really comes down to is how decentralized is it? There's a bunch of half-assed decentralized DAOs out there, and they're all like tokens on Ethereum, or in some cases they have their own chain, but none of them are really layer one. It's all like a single corporate entity, and that's it. And then that corporate entity runs the show through a foundation or something. That's not the future. In my view, the future of DAOs is going to be something that's a blockchain-like structure, and hey, we'll try to make it ride on top of Decred. So DAOs, I think, will ultimately be the future way that capital organizes itself. Whether we're talking in the cryptocurrency space or peripheral to it. Just because there's so many constraints put in place by things like corporate entities, and then operating as an individual. There's a lot of things that we can achieve as as groups of intelligent life forms that you can't do without a larger scale organization. And I think DAOs could be the way to do that moving forward. Now, that won't solve every problem, because hey, some problems require governments require to file a million pieces of paperwork, and that might not jive with a DAO. But I think there's a lot of problems and a lot of human progress that can be mined out of DAOs.
I want to thank you, Jake, for coming on. The last word goes to you. What question did I not ask, or what's your final message to the community?
I'm not very good at criticizing what people didn't do. I'm better at criticizing what people did do. I'm not really one to criticize people. When it comes to, you gotta screw up pretty bad for me to be like, oh, I'm gonna really get up your ass about something. So maybe I'll just leave it at a final word. When it comes to where we're going as a human species, I try to make Decred where we're going. A lot of people just view this as like, oh, I'm gonna like throw some money at it, and then maybe I'll get rich and I'll sell it and have a big house. I mean, I'm not here for that. I'm here for the big societal level change, and my hope is that a lot of you are too. We're not going to get there. We're not going to change the world, if we just sit on our asses. You got to get up and do stuff. Anybody who wants to, participate in the project, I invite you, come, show up, but do not armchair manage people. Do not try to tell the rest of us what to do. Show up and pitch in. Find something you're good at, or find something you're passionate about. Work on it. That's that's the only way that we make any progress with Decred, which is passionate people doing what they care about in an effort to change things for the better. And with that, the revolution will not be centralized.
I think that's the perfect way to end this. Thank you, Jake, for coming on. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Please share this, and we will see you in the next episode of Decred in Depth.